Good morning, Dawg Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. A lot to do, two great guests. It's Davin Bellamy later on, Mike Griffith in a few moments. We'll spend a little bit of time, and I promise no more than we need to and have to, on the debacle in the second half last night for Georgia basketball. Just hard to watch. And we try to be as generous and as, I guess, gracious as we can be with our analysis when it comes to stuff like this. But at a certain point in time, the truth must be told. We'll do our part to do that today. And to kick things off here today, legitimately, I believe, some surprising analysis from some NFL draft scouts about some former Dogs on their way to the league via the draft here this spring. We'll celebrate this as good news, but we'll also ask some questions about, well, exactly what does this mean for Georgia in this particular instance? So all of that is on the way. We are glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We've sort of reached mock draft season in sports. Many of you kind of know what this is. It's obviously, you got March Madness coming up for some programs, perhaps not ours. You got March Madness coming up. After that, the next big thing, opening day for Major League Baseball, NFL draft looming there. And in a lot of ways, this is sort of the thing that consumes the sports media world this time of year. What is going to happen in the upcoming NFL draft? In the first round, the rounds after that, what will we see kind of take place? And obviously for Georgia fans, this is also interesting because much like Georgia kind of was the main factor seemingly all over all the major storylines for the Super Bowl this past Sunday, Georgia in recent years has also been like the most talked about team for the NFL draft too. Some of this is to be expected. You see guys like Jalen Walker and Malachi Starks and Mikael Williams pretty much mocked in everybody's mock draft to be first-round picks. But you also see some draft chatter coming from places about players that might catch you off guard, at least just a little bit. I want to give you some of that here for a moment. Then we're going to use that to talk about the current state of Georgia football. Let me start with Matt Miller here. Draft scout now working for ESPN. I think he's sort of been all over the place, but now with ESPN. Here's what he wrote on the X platform yesterday. The Georgia interior offensive line was definitely banged up this year, but all three of those guys, Dylan Fairchild, Jared Wilson, Tate Ratledge, they all look like plug-and-play NFL starters to me. They're being oddly slept on. Very interesting analysis by Matt Miller, draft analyst there for ESPN. Now, let me say this, and make sure this is fully understood. When we say this is surprising, we don't mean because we think that any of those players, Dylan Fairchild, Jared Wilson, Tate Ratledge, is somehow deficient or not a good football player. I think we've all seen enough over the course of our time watching Georgia football, especially in the case of Fairchild and Ratledge, two guys we just saw for a lot longer period of time. Yeah, they really are good players when healthy, and they really will have, we think, the potential for very, good, distinguished NFL careers. We believe that. We came to like some things about Jared Wilson here this year. Don't know that we ever quite saw the best of Wilson, dealt with some interesting things like that, but we like some of what we saw from Jared Wilson here this year too. So when we say this analysis is surprising, it's not because we don't think Fairchild's a good player, we don't think Ratledge is a good player, we don't think Wilson's a good player. We do. The reason why this is surprising is because it kind of runs counter to what was sort of obviously true for Georgia and its offensive line this season, that while it was kind of made up of good players, somehow the unit itself wasn't very good. Now, how does that happen? And to kind of, I guess, sort of accentuate this point a little further, a different draft analyst also working for ESPN, they got like 8 million draft analysts working for them, a different draft analyst named Jordan Reed, upon seeing what Matt Miller put out on X, he kind of came in and gave you a little bit more on this. So Matt Miller says the Georgia interior offensive lineman being slept on, Fairchild, Jared Wilson, Tate Ratledge, they're all going to be NFL starters, not getting enough attention right now. Then Jordan Reed goes on to say this, and I'll put this on the screen for you. This was a kind of a quote tweet of the original Matt Miller tweet. Reed saying, one of my scouting notes from this season in the Super Bowl, Reed says, I wonder if we see more GMs attempt to draft productive teammates in the trenches more. He says chemistry and comfort between young players. So please understand what Jordan Reed's saying here. He is saying, I emphatically agree with Matt Miller so much on the fact that Fairchild and Ratledge and Wilson are being slept on that I believe, this is Jordan Reed speaking, that I believe a team might try to put as many of them as possible, at least two of them, if not all three of them, on the same team together. So what we have is that the NFL looks at the Georgia offensive line men and says, we want to replicate that at the NFL. But the Georgia offensive line playing together in college, somehow it didn't quite work out to be very good. Now, how does that work? How do you get there on that? And by the way, we're going to ask some questions today that don't necessarily have easy answers because I'm not that smart, but it sort of feels like a question that has to be asked of, well, if we like the individual players, and we do, and I've talked to enough, because one thing I try to do is I want to try to talk to people who are smarter than me. People who are smarter than me frequently will tell you, I love Dylan Fairchild. Love everything he does. Love Tate Ratledge when he's healthy. Love everything that he does. A lot of folks were very impressed with Jared Wilson. Certainly his athleticism's off the chart. When we go to the – no, I'm not going, but when the football world goes to the combine in a little bit, Jared Wilson's going to, I promise you, be the talk of that because he's going to run like a track star. So if people are sleeping on Wilson now, these NFL scouts who love these stopwatches, they're going to lose their mind when Jared Wilson runs because he's that kind of athlete. So smart people have certainly told me that plenty. So smart people have already told me what Matt Miller says right there. Fairchild and Ratledge and Wilson, boy, the NFL's just going to love these guys. These are going to be starters. And I am very happy about that. And Miller and Reed, not the first guys to say that. But let's face it, we are not an NFL draft show. There are NFL draft podcasts, and perhaps you listen to many of them. I don't fault you if you do. We, though, are not an NFL draft show. We are a Georgia football show. And the question that Georgia football fans, I think, want the answer to is, well, how come all these future NFL starters did not quite add up to be a great offensive line for Georgia here this year? And perhaps the answer to that question is just a simple one. Sometimes, what is it? Is it Occam's razor? Is that the thing? Where the simplest explanation is often the best explanation? Maybe the sort of, if I'm using this phrase correctly, maybe the sort of Occam's razor of this discussion is what Matt Miller said at the beginning of his quote. In fact, if it's not too much trouble, can we put the Matt Miller thing back on the screen again? Because maybe Miller gives us the Occam's razor answer to all of this. He says the interior offensive line was definitely banged up this year. Maybe that's it. Maybe what Miller says while praising the future of these three guys, Fairchild, Wilson, and Ratledge, as NFL starters, maybe the absolute definitive proof for why the Georgia offensive line didn't quite add up to what it could have been is because what Miller says there. They were just too injured at Georgia to make the impact they were capable of making. And if that's true for Fairchild, Wilson, and Ratledge, it's especially true for a guy like Ernest Green, who I think it's now, there's a lot of stuff that sort of now it can be told at the end of a football season. I think now people are getting more acquainted with how hurt Green was a lot during the year. For whatever reason, Georgia works really hard to conceal this kind of stuff. But during the year, it wasn't being talked about, and now it's being talked about more. The Green essentially couldn't lift his shoulder, I don't think, which obviously if you're trying to block one of these SEC edge rushers, the inability to move your shoulder, you got to imagine that's probably a very difficult thing to try to navigate when you've got these, missiles breathing down your quarterback's neck. Pretty tough to do. Maybe it just is that simple. Green's banged up. Your three interior guys are banged up. They all missed time. Maybe that's the thing that kept the Georgia offensive line from being what it could have been this season. And to be fair, Kirby Smart did talk about that. After the Ole Miss game, for instance, which was probably the low water mark, at least in the regular season for that group here this year, the Ole Miss pass rush very successful against Georgia. Kirby Smart in the aftermath of that game, moving into the Tennessee week, the week after, did discuss, the challenge of who's healthy enough to play, how many reps they can give me, and what do you do to navigate an offensive line that was perhaps at times as injured as the Matt Miller comment a moment ago suggested that they were. This is what Smart said about those offensive line injuries back during the season.
Well, you go with what the medical people give you. You know what I mean? If a guy's healthy enough to practice, he practices. If he's not, then he doesn't. So I go at the recommendation of the tremendous training staff we have. Those kids want to practice. They want to go out there and do it. And sometimes they can. Sometimes they can do certain things and they can't do others. I defer to those guys. And most of the time, especially on your offensive line, it's like the toughest unit you have. So they're going to give you everything they've got. And they want to go out there and practice and play. But in some cases they can, some cases they can't.
I don't think anybody disputes the last part of what Smart says there, given the specific offensive lineman we're talking about. The idea that these are among the toughest players in the team, everything that I know would suggest that's true. The idea that if they're even just slightly healthy enough to play, they're going to go out there and do it. Yep, we would say that's probably true based on the people that we know that know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who can tell us more about the inner workings of what's going on there. These are, as Jim Ross would say, guys who are tougher than shoe leather, and they're going to want to be out there on the field as much as they possibly can. And maybe that was just it. Maybe that was just the simple story of 2024 for Georgia, that otherwise very good offensive linemen who have very bright NFL futures were just too injured this year to come together and make this be a great unit. And maybe the entirety of the Georgia program suffered because of that. Maybe it is just that simple. However, there's also a part of me that doesn't want to let Georgia, the program, off the hook quite so easily. The players themselves, I think they were out there trying to do their best. I think that Smart is right about that. And as healthier draft prospects, maybe they'll go on to get big paydays in the NFL. And frankly, I hope they do. I believe they deserve it. I really do. But as we said, we're not really thinking so much about their NFL future right now as we're thinking about, okay, what is the current state of the Georgia offensive line, and how come it wasn't much better than it was there in 2024? I mean, the numbers are really staggering. That Georgia was, and this is Georgia we're talking about here. I mean, this is such a shocking statistical profile for Georgia. 11th out of 16 teams in the SEC last year when it comes to rushing yards per attempt. Like what? 11th in the SEC, bottom third of the league? Even worse than that when it comes to rushing yards per game. Georgia was 15th out of 16 teams rushing yards per game, basically almost outside the top 100 nationally in that category a year ago. And for something that Georgia sort of always does well, which is protect quarterbacks and keep the quarterback from getting sacked, after only allowing 13 sacks in the entirety of the 2023 season, Georgia allowed 25 sacks this past year, essentially doubling its sacks allowed total year over year. I mean, can all of that just sort of be chopped up? We were injured. What do you want us to do? We were injured. Can't help it. We're injured. Like, is all of it just that simple? As I said before, while you certainly respect the fact that a lot of these guys, including if you're watching a video, the guy you see on your screen, we're led to believe really was really, really hurt and trying to play as injured as he was, trying to make the best of it, and he deserves credit for that. Like, some of the injury conversation is real, but some of the discussion about Georgia being at the bottom nationally, in the bottom of the SEC in terms of rushing yards, doubling its sacks allowed total, it's almost like some of that we don't want to just sort of explain away simply by, they were banged up, so you can't really expect much more from that. Individual players, they were injured. But collectively as a unit, should the performance have been better? It's worth noting that around the same time that all this talk was taking place about who's healthy enough to play and what do you do about that and how do you handle that, Kirby Smart was also stepping up to defend his offensive line against the kind of criticism that I'm sort of putting out right now, or at least, giving voice to. This is also what Smart said at the time on all that.
I'm completely confident in our offensive line. I think our offensive line it's got a good offensive line. We can't put them in a harm's way. And when you play on the road, guys, there's not a guy in this room that's lined up at left tackle with 80,000 people screaming at the top of their lungs, and he knows it's a pass. He gets a a distinct 0.5 advantage, and 0.5 is a lot. Trust me, I know from coaching this league, it's hard to do. You got to find ways to help people. You got to be able to run the ball to slow it down, and you got to help them out some.
So as I said before, some of our conversation today are questions that don't necessarily have easy answers of, well, where does the injury excuse end and the responsibility to have better play with whoever's healthy enough to be out there begin? Where is the line of demarcation on that? We don't necessarily know for sure, but here's what I can tell you. When you hear about a reminder from a Miller or a Reed or these ESPN NFL draft analysts, you are reminded that despite the fact that collectively as a unit, Georgia's offensive line didn't perform very well, there are some really good players now leaving the program. And the kind of weird irony is that while every Georgia fan hopes this group could be better in 2025 and essentially expects that it will be, I don't mean to be a wet blanket here, but this is just honest talk. History would suggest, when you go back and look, and the math dudes like Bill Connolly and others will write about this during the offseason, history would suggest when you have this much to replace on your offensive line, losing all of these starters on their way to the NFL, that lack of continuity year over year typically suggests regression. So in other words, for a Georgia offensive line that didn't play very well this year, it actually gets a little tougher to be better next year and starting this spring, getting ready for the 2025 season, knowing that the veteran presence of especially guys like Ratledge and Fairchild, who had been around here and played a lot of good snaps for Georgia for a long time, actually getting better next season could be made tougher because of the quality of player that's now leaving this Georgia program. So it seems fair to wonder, what do you do about that? And I'm not trying to have an overly negative conversation or anything like that today, but I am trying to be real. I'm trying to be candid about this. Like, what do you do about that? Georgia needs offensive line improvement, yet good offensive linemen are now leaving the program, and their replacements are going to be much less experienced next season. So what do you do about that? Well, here'd be my one wish for the spring. What I would love to have happen, I don't know if this will happen or not, but I would like for Kirby Smart, when he speaks about the offensive line, and he'll be doing that plenty, I'd like for Kirby Smart to be more candid about that group than he was in the clip that we just heard of. I've got plenty of confidence in our offensive line. We think we have a very good offensive line, and you can't expect us to block guys when we play on the road. That's not the standard that Georgia football was built on of, hey, it's a tough road environment, the crowd is loud, what do you want us to do about it? That's not the Georgia standard. Georgia's standard is much, much higher than that. And I'd love to hear, Kirby be a little bit more candid about an honest evaluation of what the Georgia offensive line was last season, what it needs to be here this year. Not the individual players, because I would say there is not an individual offensive lineman for Georgia that I don't like. I like them all. The guys who are still here, I think, have bright futures. The guys that we were mentioning right now that just left, I think they gave a lot to Georgia during their careers. Individually, I like all of those guys. But collectively, it did not add up to what it was supposed to add up to. Now, whether or not you blame Stacey Searels for that and how much of that you do blame Stacey Searels will certainly be a conversation that continues to be had. How much of this can be excused away by the long list of injuries they dealt with, that's probably fair in this too. Go back to the Kentucky game for a moment. You remember when there was discussion about the communication not being very good in that road game? Georgia had an inept offensive performance against a very bad Kentucky team. Some of that was blamed on a lack of effective offensive line communication. That was the thing that was talked about. Was that a persistent problem throughout the year? I don't know. But to me, step one in fixing this offensive line is being more candid about what the actual issues for the offensive line were. So we'll see this spring if that occurs. Georgia had good linemen last year. The NFL draft process right now would suggest that's true. But these good offensive linemen didn't collectively add together to be an offensive line unit that performed very well. Why exactly was that? We may never know for sure, but ultimately, the results need to be better in 2025, and the work to make sure that happens is starting right now. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We're glad you are with us, whether it's video, 10 a.m. across all platforms, radio, Athens Sports Radio 96 The Rap, podcast, wherever you find them, Apple, Spotify. We're just really glad that you're here and a part of our program here today. We appreciate our friends at Breda Pest Management who make it all possible. The official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. We love that. And we really believe that, just given the arms race that's out there right now with every athletic program trying to be as big as they can, as successful as they can, it requires a lot of support to be able to do that. So we think it makes a lot of sense to support those that support UGA. And that's clearly what Breda Pest Management's been all about, the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. They're also longtime friends of ours here on DawgNation Daily. So admittedly, there's a sort of a selfish ambition I have that for you to support Breda, because Breda's been kind enough to support us. But also they're good about supporting the dogs too. They wouldn't be the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics if they weren't out there doing that sort of thing. So work with the company the dogs work with. That's always a really good thing. But also, when you make the decision to switch to Breda Pest Management for your termite protection, for instance, when you get ready to make that switch, they're going to put more money back in your pocket just for making that decision. That's what Breda Pest Management is all about. So I want you to find them online. BREDA, BredaPest.com. BREDA, BredaPest.com for a lot more on that. I'll also tell you this, just in having, conversations with, our friends at Breda throughout the years and stuff like that. Here's one of the things I've learned. This is that time of year, when it's like warm one day and then sort of cold the next, and they kind of toggles back and forth between warm and cold, warm and cold, warm and cold. Let me tell you one of the things that does to you, or at least, does to your home. Like the critters start coming out of the woodwork a little bit more when it's warm. They're like, it feels good. I want to be outside, enjoy some warm weather. But then it gets cold again, and those critters panic. I'm talking about like rodents or the things that like to eat the rodents and stuff like that. All of a sudden, when it's warm, they come out, and then it gets cold again. Now they're looking to sort of go where they can get warm. Well, guess where they're going? Sometimes that's in your attic or your crawl space, your basement, things like that. That's the sort of thing that Breda Pest Management also does to you as well, like flying squirrels and crazy stuff like that we have in Georgia. Our friends at Breda Pest Management want to take care of you in that arena too. So more online, BredaPest.com, BREDA, BredaPest.com for a lot more on that. Okay, we got Around the Doghouse here coming up in a moment. Let me take care of a little bit of housekeeping just for a second. We've sort of arrived at a time of year in which we don't take any days off during the football season. And for us, football season is basically, July through February. That's, we have a very liberal definition of what counts as football season around here. But when you kind of get to this time of year, kind of looking to sort of step back and take a couple of days off, I am going to do some of that next week. Now, here's what we're going to do for you, because I think a lot of folks have kind of enjoyed a little bit of this. We are going to have pre-recorded shows on both Monday and Tuesday. These are full pre-recorded shows, kind of reflecting in the news of the moment. We're going to record them like on Friday to air the following 2 days. So they'll be really, really fresh and really, really new. But we're not going to do a full week's worth of pre-recorded shows. Seems like y'all have kind of enjoyed some slightly more live interaction. So for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of next week, we're going to have some special guests, some of our DawgNation teammates sort of stepping in and being a part of some of our live coverage here during the 10 a.m. hour. And then on the on-demand platforms after that, Connor and Jeff and Kaylee and maybe Cody and a lot of folks who are stepping in and being a part of that. That should be a lot of fun. So Monday and Tuesday next week will be pre-recorded shows. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, it'll be a portion of me. I'll have a pre-recorded segment in each of these shows because listen, y'all know my motor mouth won't stop talking very long. So we'll do some of that on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of next week, but completely pre-recorded on Monday and Tuesday. I'm not going anywhere fun or anything like that. Family's a little bit too busy for that right now, but I am looking forward to just kind of recharging the batteries a little bit. So we're going to do some of that next week. So we'll give you more details on that, but wanted to kind of give you a heads up. It'll be a little bit different next week, so just be wary of that. Now, we got Davin Bellamy later on. That'll be a good discussion. It's Mike Griffith here in just a little bit. Prior to that, let's go around the doghouse. Don't want to spend any more time on this than I have to, but obviously we love being around the doghouse with our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. Last night was a tough one for Georgia basketball. And look, here's my perspective on this. I'm going to be, as quick on this topic as I can. Georgia has a big first-half lead against Texas A&M, essentially does not score in the second half, allowed the Aggies going a 22-0 run. Georgia went, do I have this right? They went 12 minutes out of the half without a field goal. Didn't have their first field goal in the second half until the under 8 timeout, I think. Just a really, really awful stretch for Georgia in the second half last night against A&M. Not the first time this year there have been these second half struggles. And like we have tried to be, and we will continue to try to be, as generous and gracious as we can with our evaluation of Georgia basketball, because the truth is this team is better than previous teams have been. You know, for instance, we said this, I think it was on Monday. This is sort of what bubble teams do. Bubble teams play well against a ranked team like Mississippi State before coughing it up late, or they allow bad stretches on the road to turn into disaster. This is what bubble teams sort of do. Georgia hasn't even been as good as a bubble team in quite some time, so perhaps we forget that or maybe don't know that or whatever else. But this sort of is just kind of what bubble teams do. And if Georgia can find some wins between now and the end of the season, they still have a chance to be in the NCAA tournament. So we want to try to be as like gracious and generous in our analysis of Georgia as we possibly can. And yet, at the same time, you got to call it like it is here too, which is I am so impressed by Georgia fans for how willing to buy in they are. Like at the beginning of this season, any chance for hope, any possibility for belief, and UGA fans, at least the ones that are kind of open to buy for college basketball, and not every Georgia fan cares about basketball, and I don't think that's a problem. You actually probably don't need a basketball fan base that's as big as your football fan base in order to be, competitive, and there are just a lot more people that care about Georgia football than basketball. That's why we talk so much about football, because that's what the fans care about. But there is a portion of Georgia fandom that does care about basketball, and those fans are so willing to believe, they're so willing to buy in, they're so willing to be on the ground floor of something that might be built to be more substantial. And when you get a non-conference win against a team like St. John's, when you get your first 2 SEC wins against Kentucky and then even Oklahoma, boy, there is just tons of goodwill around Georgia basketball. All of that supplied by the fans who are willing to just buy into anything that looks like hope, that looks like belief, that looks like promise. They'll just buy into anything because that's how supportive Georgia fans are willing to be. But now you're left to wonder, all the goodwill that was built up, a tank just full of goodwill around the halfway point of the season or so, you sort of wonder, will there be any of that left by the end of the season? For the simple reason that the Dogs cannot put the ball in the hoop. And I saw a quote from Mike White last night. I didn't get a chance to watch the press conference. I haven't seen it posted anywhere. Perhaps it is. I just haven't seen it. But I'm going to read this to you from DawgNation.com, a quote from White after the game. So what it looked like to me, in the second half, Asa Newell had been in foul trouble a lot in the first half, but in the second half, with Newell kind of in the painted area, A&M essentially just denied him the ball, dared Georgia to shoot him out of that zone, and they just couldn't do it. I mean, and they're not going to do it ever. They're just not going to do that. Let me read the quote. I haven't had a chance to do that yet. Put that back up there. So White's quote is about A&M defensively. They made some adjustments. They went to their matchup zone, switching up everything. It really had us a little off balance there in the second half. You think so? Did it have you a little off balance, you'd say? I mean, a 22-0 run. And look, Georgia basketball's a tough job. Mike White faced a daunting task when he was hired here. I'm not ready to condemn him necessarily. And clearly the overall talent level, transfers, incoming freshmen like Asa Newell, returning players like Blue Kane. This is the best Georgia team in a long time. But it's got to be better than that. It just has to be. It has to be better than that. All of the challenges that and the friction and headwinds that you face as the Georgia basketball coach, all of that given, it's got to be better than it was last night. And yes, this team still has a chance to be in the NCAA tournament. They've got opportunities to improve their resume in somewhat winnable games moving forward. But if you can't score, you're not going to beat those teams either. So that's just how it is. And that's Around the Doghouse, presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. And speaking of calling it like it is, that's what our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau do for you, because you got to have insurance. Auto insurance, home insurance, these things legally, you have to have it. And that means that you're probably making the decision of, well, who do you want to work with? What's the best company for you when it comes to stuff like that? I can tell you this, our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau are right here in the great state of Georgia in communities just like yours. They're going to work every day. They're living and dying with Georgia athletics, perhaps like you are, each and every day. They're always the home team. That means when you got an insurance need, friendly agents, friendly claims adjusters, folks kind of doing that work in the same state that you're in, that's what they're all about. So give them a call today, 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050. You can also find them online, gfbinsurance.com. That's gfbinsurance.com. Their Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team, a great resource for you. They've been a supporter of our agricultural community in our state for a long time, and now they want to provide you support for your insurance needs. Georgia Farm Bureau bringing around the doghouse to us today here on DawgNation Daily. All right, it is Davin Bellamy later on. It's Mike Griffith right now. A lot to discuss. Glad to have him and all of you with us for here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Say hello to Mike Griffith here. We don't talk a ton of basketball. I don't want to spend any more time on this than need be, but I do want to ask you, Mike, look, it can't be that bad. I don't care if you're playing the last dance Chicago Bulls. You can't get outscored 22-0. You just can't. You just can't. You can't. And Georgia fans have done a remarkable job supporting this team this year. I'm not ready to condemn them. Maybe they find, win at Texas, and maybe they'll beat Missouri on Saturday. Maybe they'll do just enough to make the tournament, and frankly, I hope they do. It'd be fun to be involved in March Madness. But at the same time, there is a moment in which the goodwill expires. And whatever goodwill that was built up over the course of this year, we're about a quart low on that here right now. What'd you make of the debacle in the second half in College Station last night?
Yeah, I get it, Brandon. And you already said it doesn't matter if they're playing the Bulls, but it might as well be. I mean, my goodness, this SEC, 4 of the top 5 teams in the nation. I mean, Buzz Williams is a good coach. A&M is a good team. And hey, Georgia went up by 9 points at halftime. I bet there was a lot of Aggie fans going, Texas A&M, they've got to be better than this. You can't be falling. Or Auburn blowing a 17-point lead in Athens earlier this year. This can't happen to Bruce Pearl. It goes both ways. I understand why the glass is half empty today, because it looked like an opportunity to steal a road win. And that really, really would have firmed things up a little bit more at a really critical time, because now they've got number 21 Missouri coming in. It's going to be just like Mississippi State. This is a projected 7 seed, 50-50 game at home on Saturday. This is a big one because the next 2 games are at number 1 Auburn and at home against number 3 Florida. And those teams are red hot and really good. The good news, Brandon, is down the stretch. They've got a very doable 3-game stretch there against teams. 2 of the 3 teams are projected slightly ahead of them in the tournament. At Texas, at home against Vanderbilt in the regular season finale. They got to win on the road at South Carolina. If the Dogs can get 3 more wins, 3 more could put them in. 4 more wins would put them in. Now, that's not me talking. That's Joe Lunardi. And these net rankings, this is like a new world looking at these metrics. At least this NCAA Tournament Selection Committee tells us they can point to a metric, the net rankings, where all this quad 1 stuff is at, quad 2, quad 3, where we can say, okay, here's what Georgia's done, and here's what they need to do. And they're still number 35 in the net. They only dropped 1 spot. So the good news is, unlike the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, which is quite subjective, these metrics, these numbers are the numbers. I mean, they don't say, oh, gosh, Georgia didn't score and gave up a 20. They just look at the numbers. They say, okay, this is a quad 1 loss on the road to a top 75 team, very high team at that. So, to your point, what happened? Well, Dakota LaFleur was out. He's their best 3-point shooter, and the guy that filled in, he wasn't nearly as good. Give Georgia credit, give Blue King credit for a 15-point first half, hitting their free throws now, hitting some threes, and then giving A&M credit for, Buzz Williams is an elite coach, made some good adjustments with some good personnel. Asa Newell, never in the flow of the game, probably the worst game of the year for the freshman, had 2 fouls in the first half, only got to play 6 minutes, only hit 1 shot in the game. That's not Asa. You're not going to win many games with Asa Newell going 1 of 5 from the floor and scoring 4 points. And yet they were winning at halftime without scoring any. So there were some good things. There was some growth in this. And I know it's hard because, they lost and there was an opportunity. But this team is growing before our eyes. They're not always getting the results, but good things are happening. Now, when does it come to fruition? I think Saturday, even though I'm not going to say it's must win, it's pretty darn close because Auburn and Florida are on deck. And you don't want to roll into that crucial 3-game stretch on a 4-game losing streak. So I'm going to wait for Saturday and see how Mike White and the Bulldogs respond.
So, I appreciate what you're saying. I don't think they're growing at all. I mean, they're actually favored against Mississippi State on Saturday. Mississippi State came as the ranked team. Georgia as the home team was favored in the game. And it's just too easy to neutralize. And look, this is not a team that's. There was a time in which you would have said, well, if you want to compete in the SEC, you got to spend, big dollars NIL wise. Well, listen, they got a future top 15 pick on the court. They got transfers galore. Many of those were names that college basketball fans would have been aware of. This is not it's probably not the richest NIL roster in the SEC, far from it. But this is also not this is not like some team scraped together with quarters from the couch cushions either. This is a roster that was put together to be more than what this is, and some of that can be attributed to, and I'm not anywhere near as big a college basketball fan as I used to be, but I grew up big fan of like the ACC in the '80s, Big East in the '80s, back in the hottest days for college basketball. You can make a case that this SEC is the deepest league ever. Even the old classic days of ACC back when it was an 8-team conference, and the Big East back when it was all those Northeast schools. This is maybe the deepest basketball league ever. So some of this is just bad luck of, gosh, it's just such a deep league. But at the same time, I think Georgia fans are well in their rights not to just sort of dismiss not scoring at all. Well, yeah, you play in a tough conference, so therefore the ball never goes in the hoop. I just don't. I think that Georgia fans are within their rights to say, even in a deep league, need you to be a little bit better than this.
I agree, and your history's right. It was, I think, in 2019 when the ACC had 3 of the top 4 ranked teams, Virginia, Duke, North Carolina. And now those teams are, Auburn, Alabama, and Florida, I guess, would be the 3 of the top 4 right now. So, and you're right, as far as what the NCAA tournament projections look like, the SEC currently projected with 13 teams. Yeah. The record is 11 from the Big East in 2011. So we may be seeing the best conference ever. And John Calipari actually said that earlier this year. Now, to your point, yeah, you're right. This isn't couch change money, as you said, that built this team. But they did beat Rick Pitino and St. John's. That was a good win. They did beat Kentucky, something Tennessee didn't do this year. They lost twice to them. And they did beat a ranked Oklahoma, and they still have opportunities. Missouri is an opportunity game. I don't think they're going to beat number 1 Auburn on the road. Florida at home, Florida is really good. They're just really good. I think they're a Final Four team. But can they win the 3-game stretch? Yes. And of course there's frustration, just like there was frustration with Georgia football in the first half at Alabama. It was abysmal, or 28-10 on the road. They scored. You got to score points if you're the Georgia Bulldogs and you've got Carson Beck. And they scored 10 at Ole Miss, and they scored 10 against Notre Dame, a team that, only had 244 total yards. So I understand the frustrations, but basketball mentality, it's a little bit different. You need to have even more of that resilience. You're going to take your punches. You're going to take your lumps. They weren't supposed to beat A&M on the road. That would have been a bonus. That would have been a steal. You mentioned Mississippi State. I didn't see the final odds, maybe 2 or 3 points they're favored. That's a 50-50 game to me. State's pretty doggone good. They've been to the tournament a couple years in a row. I think the problem, if we're going to dig just a little bit deeper, is Silas Demery is a great leader. He's an explosive scorer. But you and I both know the ball movement has not been elite, okay? He's not a classic true point guard. And Blue Kane, I think, has improved greatly, but he's not a guy that's going to create his own shot. And when A&M made that switch and they slowed the guy down, the guy had 15 points at 3 out of 5. He scored 2 free throws to start the second half, and they didn't score again. They kept the ball from Blue. They found a way. They win at Newell. They got him in foul trouble. They roughed up the fresh. Again, they're playing good teams and really good coaches that know how to stop them. So we need other players to emerge for Georgia. You needed Dakota LaFew. It's unfortunate he couldn't play. He's their best 3-point shooter. You need Dylan James to emerge a little bit, right? You got to have some of these guys step up. And it is a good roster, but it's relatively young. Again, I think they're growing. I know that 22-0 run doesn't necessarily reflect that, but I think a lot of that was A&M. And I think a lot of that was Asa Newell having a rough game. He just had a rough game, and you're not going to see it often from him. He's a great kid. He's poised. I'm very confident he'll bounce back. I just think it's too early to push the panic button. The Dogs are still close enough to where they want to be to maintain some optimism, especially if they can bring home a win on Saturday against the Missouri Tigers.
We've probably given this topic more than it deserves. Let me shift to the Georgia offensive line for a moment, a less stressful topic.
Is it though? Is it?
Yeah, I say that sarcastically. What we said before you joined us was, I like every one of these guys individually. And the genesis for this was some draft praise that guys like Dylan Fairchild and Tate Ratledge and Jared Wilson are getting. I like every one of these guys individually. The three guys I just mentioned on the way to the NFL, I expect they will be good pros. I know that Jared Wilson's going to tear up the NFL scouting combine. I don't know that we saw the best of him at Georgia for various reasons, but I do absolutely believe that Fairchild and Ratledge are awesome players and probably future NFL starters. I like them all. I think that even after his Sugar Bowl struggles, I think Monroe Frilling's got a really bright future. And I like Ernest Green a lot, too. I think people don't realize how banged up Ernest probably was during the year. I think that he is still got a really bright future ahead of him in football. I like all of these guys individually, but collectively, somehow it just didn't quite add up this year to what it was supposed to be. Why do you think that is? Is it all, as has been said, just simply due to injury? Is there something else going on? Does Stacey Searles deserve the blame? And I'm sort of open for anything, but it is perhaps the biggest topic for Georgia going into spring practice of, we have reason to believe that individually these are very good offensive linemen, but collectively this wasn't a very good unit. The stats tell that story explicitly. What do you think's going on there?
Well, I think it's a lot of things, but I do think injuries played a major. Remember, Tate was out 4 games. He came back from tightrope surgery. Was he the same guy when he came back, though? It was interesting he passed on the Senior Bowl, Brandon, because Tate's a competitor, and it almost makes me wonder if he's not quite 100% when he was playing. Able to play, but maybe not the same guy when you miss 4 games with tightrope. I remember Kirby telling us about 2/3 of the way through the year, all of the offensive linemen missed at least 1 week of practice with injury. And you know this as well as I do, that continuity and knowing what that guy next to you is doing is so important. So I think they lacked continuity. I also think that Georgia was in a lot of difficult down and distance situations. You can look at the third down conversion percentage. It was pretty low. That was because Georgia did not have a run game. It's been a long time. In fact, I think that was Kirby Smart's worst year for a rushing offense. So a lot of times these guys are being put in difficult circumstance of down and distance where everybody knows they got to throw it. And why is that? Well, you're not running the ball well. And then there was a lot of drop passes. There just was. And so one thing affects another. It's like the whole plane crash thing. It's never one thing. It's a cascade of events that affect it. You know, you heard Kirby Smart saying about the offensive production. Hey, our defense didn't do as much. Georgia didn't get many turnovers. They didn't get many 3-and-outs. The field position wasn't what it's been. So a weaker defense portends into a weaker offense because of circumstance. All that said, I think one thing that Steve Spurrier said, and I know he's not your favorite guy, but last week when he called me from a golf course, just randomly, got a trivia question. Who's the only SEC coach to ever win an SEC championship? You know, active coach. It's Kirby Smart. That's right. And I've been reading people are saying he's had a bad year, and that's ridiculous. He did the second hardest thing there is to do in college football. He won an SEC title. The only coach Spurrier said that could say he had a better year was Ryan Day, and he said he had 2 do-overs to do it. And then we're talking to the Dogs at the Senior Bowl, Brandon. I think it was the defensive lineman that said, hey, it's harder to win the SEC than the national title. And I kind of sat back and said, oh, wait a minute. And then I said to myself, would Ohio State have won the SEC with Georgia's schedule? No, they wouldn't have. Is there something to that? So while losing 23-10 was disappointing, we have to consider the circumstance. I think Kirby Smart is a pro's pro. I think he's the best in the business. But you know the compromised situation that he was in the day before the game and during the game. It's hard to imagine someone being optimal under the circumstances that Kirby was in. And then you add to it the Anthony Evans whiff on the block, the Trevor Etienne fumble inside the 10. I mean, my goodness, this was one of the biggest outlier losses that I've ever seen in my life. If they play Notre Dame 10 times, they're going to beat them 9 of those 10. But it wasn't that night. We can't let that diminish what this Georgia team did with the resiliency and with that SEC championship. Though I know the game doesn't seem to mean as much now They've changed things, and now it's all about the title, apparently. But what I saw this team accomplish is something I think Georgia fans should be proud of, and I think that the returning players are going to build off of that bond that they built during that stretch run, and I think this loss is going to make them awful hungry. The only question is, and you raise it with the offensive line that's returning, and we've talked about the quarterbacks, do the Dogs have the players to get it done? Because I don't see a first-round pick, and I need to see some guys emerge before I feel confident that they're going to reach the SEC championship game next season.
All right, Mike, appreciate your time here today. Look forward to reading it at DawgNation.com. And, of course, back here very soon, DawgNation Daily presented by Brady Pest Management. We'll look forward to it.
Thank you, Brandon. I appreciate it, man. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Got more great guests coming up in a moment. We'll talk to Davin Bellamy, the great former Dog. Let's bounce around here and go cruise around the SEC before we get to that. Courtesy of Royal Caribbean, obviously exciting time to be thinking about Royal Caribbean cruise vacations. Man, I could use one right now. Boy, could I use one. But guess what? I get to have one in April, and I get to enjoy it with many of you, too, on board Utopia of the Seas. And we're going to Perfect Day Coco Cay. Can you believe that? I mean, springtime, Perfect Day Coco Cay. It doesn't get much better than that. Whether you enjoy the Thrill Water Park with the tallest water slide in North America and all the other great water slides they have at that part of the island. You get the Hideaway Beach, the incredible adults-only enclave. You get the Oasis Lagoon, which is sort of like the chill pool now. So you really sort of got whatever vibe you want. You want family-friendly with the water park, you got that. You want like just to sort of chill and read by the pool, and maybe you got young kids, they want to splash in the water. Oasis Lagoon gives you that. You want to have kind of like the Vegas-style pool party where you have the DJ and the beverages and all that kind of stuff. And guess what? Hideaway Beach, they got that for you. You want to just sort of sit in the sand next to the ocean and watch the perfect, I'm talking about just crystal blue, clear water, just gorgeous water of the Bahamas. All of that for you, Perfect Day Coco. Okay, Jessica Slater, terrific travel agent. She can help get you ready for it. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. Wonderful travel agent, specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean. She can get you going for all of your Royal Caribbean cruise vacation needs. All right, before I get Davin Bellamy, let me bounce through a couple of stories here just real quick for a moment. You know, we talked, I guess it was yesterday, about SEC title odds for Georgia and Texas, and our point yesterday was, gosh, it certainly seems like people sort of forget that Georgia has beaten Texas twice, given the fact that the gambling odds here, much like the preseason polls and the final polls, everybody seems to be showing Texas love in comparison to Georgia. Maybe Georgia can do something about that here this fall. Be fun to think they could. But in addition to that, I want to look at some of these other teams and their chances of winning the SEC here just for a moment. Let me throw this back on the screen here. We did this yesterday. These are SEC odds courtesy of FanDuel. So you talk about, you know, Texas, Georgia, the two obvious clear favorites here. Beyond that, you have both Alabama and Tennessee at 7-1. Now, here is the interesting scenario. It seems like in this rivalry, third Saturday in October, there's been a little bit of a vibe shift as of late. All of a sudden now, it's Tennessee that's won 2 of the last 3 games in this series after having gone long time without winning in this series. Well, now Tennessee's won a couple of times, and it was Tennessee that actually made the playoff a year ago, but falls totally uncompetitive when they got there. You'd like to think, if you're a Tennessee fan, which I'm not exactly sure there are very many of those listening to us right now, but you'd like to think they're ready to kind of take that next step, maybe. But a lot of that on the shoulders of Nico Iamaleava. This is going to be a very interesting year for quarterbacks in the SEC because you've got some established starters like Nico that quite haven't taken the next step, and in a situation like Alabama where there's going to be kind of a knockdown, drag-out competition where we'll wait to see who emerges. We do have some of our thoughts on who we think that's going to be, but some of that's still yet to play out. Then you move to the next 2 teams. They're at 10-1, LSU and Ole Miss. I think you're going to see a lot of movement in the direction of LSU as this offseason continues because LSU does bring back its starting quarterback in Garrett Nussmeier. The Ole Miss part of this is interesting. The gambling odds here are going to show them a lot more love than the actual top 25 preseason polls are going to give. Because the truth is, while Ole Miss has, if you look at like 24/7 Sports and things like that, they have one of the higher rated transfer portal classes again this year. I think they're ranked second in 24/7 in terms of the portal class. It's not the kind of impact, game-changing players that a Princely would have been from Florida a year ago, or a Walter Nolan would have been coming from Texas A&M a year ago. Just not that level of transfer player, I don't believe. In fact, while they're going to be listed among the higher odds teams to win the SEC, I don't believe that Ole Miss is a guarantee to be a preseason top 25 team. Pretty big change there. So we'll talk more about that, obviously, as the offseason progresses. One of the teams that you don't see listed there that I do think is perhaps more interesting, and that's Auburn. We're going to mention this yesterday. Auburn spending big to keep its defensive coordinator, DJ Durkin, in place. We have new information as to what this might have been about. Obviously, Ohio State lost Jim Knowles to Penn State. Seems like there may have been some overtures from Ohio State in the direction of Durkin. Durkin obviously spent some time in the Big Ten at Maryland, and Auburn has sort of spent big to keep him. The one thing that sort of think is when you compare a team like Auburn trying to make a big leap forward, perhaps a little more stability with that coaching staff right now. Stability and Auburn don't always go hand in hand. Maybe a little more stability with that coaching staff right now than another team like, say, for instance, Florida. It's had a lot of changeover with coaches, a lot of fan criticism of how Billy Napier's handled that offense. So if you're looking for who kind of like this year's Ole Miss is, a team on the back of some transfers, making a big dramatic improvement, maybe a team to consider with all of that might actually be Auburn. Not necessarily a playoff team, but a team that has a big improvement in its win-loss record. Tigers would be a team I have circled at least a little bit right now, and that is cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Without further ado, I want to keep our next guest waiting, the great Davin Bellamy, terrific former Dawg. And Davin, it's always great to have you as a part of our program. And one of the things we've talked a lot about on the show today is how Georgia finds that improvement with its offensive line here. That was a group that surprisingly to me just never quite clicked in 2024. And as I've now said a few times in the show, individually, I like all those players, but collectively, it didn't quite add up to what it needed to be. What do you attribute that to?
Brandon, man, it's tough, man, because, the trenches are usually where we win the most at, and it makes everybody else's job a lot easier on the offense side of the ball and the defense side of the ball. I just think this year with our offensive line, man, we just didn't have that nastiness and grit that we usually have. I mean, we saw it at times, but we didn't see it at a consistent level of the O-line that we're used to seeing railroading people, 5-6 yards, off the line of scrimmage, and then pancaking them and laying on them, and just that physicality and the mentality that our O-line used to bring that really demoralized a lot of other teams. I think this year you saw defenses not being afraid of Georgia's O-line. And the best thing that any athlete can have over another athlete is fear. And in the past, people have feared our offensive line. I think this year people came in thinking that they can take advantage of it. And all those guys are huge guys, like we recruit, in the past. I just think it was a different mentality on the O-line this year. It wasn't as nasty as it used to be.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And obviously in your football career, you've battled offensive linemen for as long as forever, I guess. How much does that unit's chemistry together matter? Because like I said before, I believe Dylan Fairchild could be a long-time starter in the NFL. I believe that Tate Ratledge could be a long-time starter in the NFL. I think that guys like Monroe Freeling and Ernest Green still have really bright futures, I think. You could go talk about the individual names, and you could see why NFL teams one day will like all of them. But how about the playing together, the working together, the communicating with each other during a game, especially in tough road environments? How much of the success of an offensive line is about the chemistry the individual players have with each other?
Well, the chemistry is so, important, and we do have to factor that in this year. Georgia did have to move a lot of pieces around, because of, some injuries, but you got to think of a, offensive line like a band or, of 5-6 guys. And, they've been rehearsing for months of, when I spin, I want the lights to hit. And then when I point, I want you to dance. So it's like a whole a band. So when guys are not in the position, that they were to start the season, and you're moving a left guard to right tackle or right guard to center or guard, to left tackle. I mean, just moving a left tackle to right tackle can mess up any, offensive lineman. So when you start talking about moving guys from guard to tackle and, they're more protected at that guard spot. And then when you move to that tackle spot, you're on the island, there's all eyes on you. And if you get beat as a tackle, the whole world can see. If you get beat as a guard, there may be some things there to cover you up. So, I just think it was a lot of moving parts this year for, the Dogs, man. And we have to take in, the injuries, and hopefully next year, those guys would be able to go multiple games starting together just to have that, chemistry.
I think that's really interesting. What do you think about them former Dogs dominating in the Super Bowl on Sunday? Impressive performance from the Eagles, and obviously the UGA names, big part of that success. What was your reaction to that?
Man, the last time we talked, I said I wouldn't bet against Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
But just the way this game lined up, our Dogs who are heavily on that D line just took over the game, and this conversation or this topic floats over to the conversation we just had. When you have a defensive line that is just dominant and an offensive line that is just dominant, everybody's job is easy.
Yep.
When the Eagles got 6 sacks and didn't blitz not one time, that is basically the defensive coordinator, Vic Fangio, saying, we're going to go out there, we're not going to get fancy. It's going to be 5-on-5 or 4-on-5, and I want you to go get to the quarterback because they cannot block you. And when a coach has that much, just that into his D line, that makes everyone else's job way, easier. The DBs didn't really have to do a lot because, Patrick Mahomes had, to check it down. And one thing I noticed is I saw a clip going online of Nolan Smith. They was running a, counter, and he met the guard and smashed him.
Yeah.
And you remember our conversation last week, and we talked about, just with a lot of the Dawg players playing in the Super Bowl, it's because the way they were raised with the Kirby Smart program, and that's what teams want to see. Well, that same exact way he crashed on that counter is the same exact way that Coach Smart teaches every DN to crash. And they showed a clip of him doing that in college.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, just a lot of the Dawg players, that those same things that helped them win a national championship, other pro teams saw that and brought those guys in. And you've seen that DNA that the Georgia D-line brought in, and all the Eagles just fed off of it. I mean, you got Nolan Smith, you got Jordan Davis, and you got Jalen Carter. That's 3 out of the 5 D linemen come from, one school. And just to watch those guys dominate and watch guys feed off of them, I don't care what nobody says about their SEC school or the college they came from. People now know that if you get, some Dogs on your team, you got a good chance of going a long way in the playoffs.
And I tell you, just a reminder of how, and I know you know this because your whole career has been kind of built on this, that dominant defensive front, pass rush, getting after quarterback. I mean, Mahomes really may be the GOAT, but if you were just watching football for the first time, you'd never know it watching him play against this Eagles group. And I, mean that, legitimately, just because you're reminded that if you do have the really effective pass rush, that's just as valuable as having the great quarterback, because it completely neutralized great quarterback in this game, did it not?
No doubt, man. And I remember watching when I seen this shift start to happen on how teams were starting to, construct their rosters. After the Denver Broncos beat Cam Newton, they had DeMarcus Ware on one end and Von Miller on one end. You start to see a lot of teams start to steal that formula because they're starting to understand that when you get deep into the playoffs, you're playing great quarterbacks, and it doesn't matter what the game plan is. You're playing a Tom Brady. You're playing a Peyton Manning. So you have to get those guys on the ground. And so now, teams used to go, we're going to have $100 million in, and then we're going to have a young guy, on the other side. And when the $100 million guy gets old, we'll pay this guy.
Yep.
Well, now since that Bronco style kind of show, man, if you just can rush the passer, you can get after people, you start to see the change in how GM has built their teams. Now we got $200 million guys on the edge. Even when you go from when Tom Brady, won with the Buccaneers. They had Shaq Barrett and Jason Pierre-Paul. Mm-hmm. So you're starting to see a lot of GMs go to, you know what? The offense is going to get us into the playoffs. The offense is going to sell tickets. But the defense, and especially that pass rush, will bring us home. And I think that's what a lot of teams are starting to see.
Let me ask you one more thing before I let you go. We talked about this yesterday. So Nolan Smith, when he was here, was always about, saying that Georgia's going to go 7-5 and trying to find anything you could find to kind of create a little extra motivation for his team, using doubts from others oftentimes as that fuel. And one of the things we've kind of pointed out is, Georgia beat Texas twice in 2024. Yet Texas was ranked higher to end the season than Georgia was, I would say, somewhat inexplicably. Texas is going to be certainly ranked higher, I would believe, to begin the 2025 season. And some gambling odds we've talked about. Texas is also favored over Georgia to win the SEC for this upcoming season, despite the fact that Georgia's the reigning champs in the league and, as we said, beat Texas twice. You're also a player who I kind of think of as a pretty effective motivator and a guy who kind of enjoyed, I think, stirring the pots with your teammate. How much can Georgia use stuff like that as fuel? The fact that, a program like Texas is sort of the media darling, despite the fact that Georgia, in its own stadium in Austin, in Atlanta in the SEC championship, got the best of the Longhorns. How much can Georgia use something like that?
Georgia can definitely use that, but I want to talk about, the gambling odds at first. Well, right now, the whole, country and all the betting guys have, Archie Manning being a Heisman finalist. So FanDuel is banking on all those teams that are in the SEC, which one has the better quarterback. Well, out of that whole list, Texas is the only one with the quarterback that's going to be up for the Heisman, which is all hype. So I definitely think Coach Smart is not looking a lot into that, but the players definitely are. And I kind of always love to bring this up about the year we decided to come back, because it really gets the fan inside the mind of the athlete. Even those times in, in the summer, we knew who we had to play and we had them written down. Our motivation was different because these teams that beat us the year before that, we thought that we were better than. So, of course, this is going to be bulletin board material. But I think this just lies on, Vegas betting on who has the best quarterback. And honestly, we haven't seen Archie Manning play with 10 weeks, 12 weeks. So that's still up, man. And I don't think they're focused on that too much. But the guys in the Georgia, locker room are definitely looking at that for, bulletin board material.
I think that's an excellent point, Davin. Always appreciate your conversation. Hope you have a great week. We'll look forward to seeing you soon here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
Always, Brandon. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs, indeed. Good stuff there from Davin Bellamy. We'll get ready to wrap things up here today, too. Fire up that song. Yeah, there you go. I think it's going to be an interesting year for the SEC when it comes to quarterbacks. As Davin said, Arch Manning, a big part of that conversation, going to get a lot of attention. But he's not the only one, and perhaps not even the best one. I mean, still like Lenora Sellers a lot from South Carolina. Guys like DJ Lagway trying to take the next step. I think that Jackson Arnold playing, at Auburn with Hugh Freeze. I think that could be an interesting conversation. And we do think that Gunnar Stockton's going to be right in the middle of that discussion, too. So I believe 2025 is going to be a really fun year for SEC quarterbacks. Let's also give out a golden shoe here today. Don't forget that coming up this weekend, it's this weekend, right? NASCAR returns Daytona 500. And, of course, speaking of NASCAR, the great Georgia fan, Chase Elliott, beloved NASCAR driver, my personal favorite, and I guess based on the voting, most people's personal favorite, wins that award seemingly every year, seen at the Super Bowl on Sunday sporting the Georgia logo on his shirt there, the old school dog face logo. We've talked about that before. We like that one. We love to see Chase Elliott showing up on Fox TV wearing that. Great to see Chase showing off the UGA colors. I know a lot of Georgia fans look forward to supporting him at Daytona, in Atlanta coming up after that, and for the entirety of the Cup season that gets ready to get going here this weekend. So good stuff from Chase Elliott. We'll give him a golden shoe for that. Lousy, stinking Gators will give them nothing. It's been 1,558 days since the lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video time now for the R.S. Andrews cool down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs, they show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on that. We're going to take a brisk spin through the comment section here today. There's a very good chance we may tap out a little earlier than normal, just kind of in that sort of mood here today, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Kirk Schultz says that Arch still has to play week in, week out, unproven on the field. Talk is cheap. I do get all that. And I think the fairest assessment I can give of Arch Manning is this. When he did have some brief moments to come into games this year, it wasn't always great. Had a hard time holding onto the football and some of those running plays. And given how unspectacular Quinn Ewers was this year, there's at least something you might take from the fact that, well, Arch Manning never seemingly overtook him for that job. Now, we do believe that, to a degree, Sark may have been playing politics here a little bit, and for a beloved local figure like Quinn Ewers, who had great love for Texas, how you treat him matters to future quarterbacks and their families who may be looking in on all this. I don't think that's lost on Sarkisian. I think they knew. I mean, in this day and age, you think, well, if you don't play the backup, is he going to leave? I think they knew that Arch was well paid enough that he wasn't going anywhere, that all of this was sort of ordained and planned a certain kind of way. So maybe you can't read too much into the fact that Arch didn't at any point in time overtake Quinn Ewers this year. I do believe that Sarkisian probably didn't want that to happen, even if, at least from a championship standard, Ewers was probably just a little bit deficient. I think that's all true. I'll also say this. If you want to go back 2 springs ago, there wasn't a ton of Arch Manning buzz around Texas at the time. There was buzz for what's-his-face ended up going to Duke. Golly, these names, I'm just telling you, the names sort of escape you. The quarterback that left Texas to go to Duke, there was buzz around him. He had a very good spring. Arch Manning at the time was probably only the 3rd-string quarterback for Texas. However, this past spring, the one that occurred a little bit more than a year ago, this past spring, there was a lot of buzz around Arch Manning. People that were close to those Texas practices liked what they saw from Arch. So all of that is my way of saying, I believe that Arch Manning's probably pretty good. Is he worthy of being the favorite for the Heisman Trophy? It's worth pointing out, even if you don't have a famous last name, the top favorite to win the Heisman Trophy almost never does. So if Manning falters, compared to that standard, he won't certainly be the first preseason Heisman favorite to fall a little short. Malik Murphy, thank you very much. I believe Danny gave us that. Murphy was the quarterback at Texas who went to Duke 2 springs ago. He got a lot of buzz in Austin during the spring. Manning got very little, but this past year, people seem to really like Arch. Kirk Schultz also giving us the Malik Murphy, too. Murphy has also since left Duke as well, right? Do I have that right? It's getting to the point where I sort of know just enough to be dangerous sometimes, it seems like. Let's see what else. Bill Sanders says, a mantra as old as the game itself, offense sells tickets, defense wins championships. We are definitely in football a defensive resurgence. There's no doubt. Look at I meant to mention this during the regular show, but look at the fact that Penn State is spending huge dollars on Jim Knowles. And look at the fact that Ohio State might be willing to go spend big dollars on a DJ Durkin to replace a Jim Knowles. Auburn, who hasn't done anything, most people couldn't even tell you that Durkin is the Auburn defensive coordinator. He's not famous in that role right now because Auburn hasn't been very relevant. They just gave him they're paying him now $2.5 million. So a few years ago, it looked like offense was totally taking over the sport, and the sport was basically going to become 7-on-7 flag football. That the only thing that mattered was how many times you're throwing it and how many points you're scoring. We have seen a major market correction here in favor of defense the last couple of years. Defense is sort of back. At the NFL level, it probably never left. College level, a little bit of a resurgence. Interesting to see that take place. Kent Holcomb sharing some happy birthday wishes. Thank you very much, Kent. I appreciate that. Today is my birthday. It is. I appreciate that. Lynn Shipman, also the same thing. Lynn, I appreciate that. She says, I hope today's as good for you as a Bulldog win over those lousy, stinking Gators. Lynn, that's very nice. I really appreciate that. Very, very nice. Okay, so Murphy has now left Duke to go to Oregon State. So there you go. Malik Murphy on the move. Very, very good stuff. Jacob O'Neill says, happy birthday, 32. Looks great on me. I appreciate that. Golly, it's getting to the point now where I can barely even remember 32. It's wild, right? It is, it is amazing. I won't spend too much time on this. But it's amazing, the last, say, we're going on 10 years of doing DawgNation Daily, and that's been a great era for me. But the whole thing's essentially a blur. It really is. Just, all of it fun, all of it great, great time for Georgia football, in addition to, us being here at DawgNation Daily, kids kind of growing up during that time. My oldest is now 13. So you've really kind of seen my daughter's 9. So it's kind of funny. It's like the 10-year history of DawgNation Daily is sort of also almost perfectly coinciding with what I think of as sort of the 10-year history of our family. My daughter from birth till now, my son from sort of toddler stage to now. It's a blur. The whole thing is just an absolute blur. Really wild. Absolute blur. Garrison Tucker says, who do you think goes first of our 3 first-rounders? I don't know that he'll go first of the 3, but the best pro, I believe, is likely to be Jalen Walker. And I say that with all due respect to the other 2, but I believe that Walker is just about a sure thing. I really do. Richard D says, what's my birthday wish for the Dogs? Well, I'll tell you this. If you could simply give me, we talked about offensive line off the top of the program. If I had the power to close my eyes and blow out the candles and have a true birthday wish, better offensive line play changes everything for Georgia. I just think it does. I just think better offensive line play changes everything. So that's probably my wish. UJ Marine says, wait till you can't remember 52. Yeah, maybe that's the case. I will say this, though. I for a lot of people who are much younger than me, who are watching the show, here's the one thing I will tell you, and this probably is not what you would expect, but I do genuinely mean this. If I could go back and be younger again, I wouldn't want to. I really wouldn't. Part of that's because, if you did start over again, given all the weird things that had to fall into place for your life to be exactly the way that it is right now, if you did relive all of that, there's no guarantee it would kind of fall into place the exact same way. And obviously that'd be a huge loss, at least from my perspective. Plus, while, you look at yourself in the mirror, you look different than you used to look. The truth is, I also know things about life now that I didn't used to know. And so when I was younger, I was dealing with kind of limited information, trying to make sense out of life using only the knowledge that I had from the experience that I'd gotten. And gosh, now I just feel like I have so much more life experience using, not always now, but using some of that life experience to have better wisdom, to make better decisions now than I would have made in the past. I'm thankful for that. And better decisions feel really good. And so given the choice of being younger and making the kinds of decisions that a young person makes, or the chance to be a little older and just sort of making better decisions, I like this better. I think I really do. There you go. Have a little happy birthday there. I'd take that cake. I'd take those those cupcakes over there. I'd take that for sure. The Georgia balloons, I love that. They probably took the black balloons from somebody's retirement party and just sort of turned it into a happy birthday thing. The red, the black motif. Yeah, you better believe I'd take that. I'd take that birthday cake. I don't know how we whipped up that graphic as quickly as we did, but that's very well done. And if that was the birthday celebration awaiting me, I'd be pretty happy about all of that. That's really very well done. And by the way, you love the happy birthday playing underneath there too. That's really, 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 really good. Really, really good stuff. Let me go to YouTube here for a moment. Johnny Surf Dog weighing in on Dylan Riley's haircut. So they're having fun over here on YouTube. DMart42, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. Spencer Clark says Mikael Williams is a rare type of athlete. He is. I think we saw the best of Mikael against Texas in Austin. He had an awesome game that day. Awesome game. I think that Jalen Walker had a far more consistent season. And now, listen, that doesn't necessarily add up to a perfect guarantee for NFL success. But if I had to put my chip down on one guy or the other, I believe I'm putting my chip down on Jalen. Adina Pruitt says, we're on baby watch for a new great-grandson. How about that for Dina? Maybe we'll share BA's birthday. Well, listen, today's also Abraham Lincoln's birthday. I believe today is Georgia Day. I think today's the day that that Georgia was founded. I believe that's the case. So February 12th is a great day to be. When I was a kid, I was really into the fact that my birthday was the same as Abraham Lincoln's. I got a lot of, like, social credit out of that. In your elementary school, there was a certain sense of pride around that. So I always kind of enjoyed that. Let's see what else. Jim K, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. I'm not a huge birthday celebrator. Like, I don't have anything planned for today. I'm thankful to still be here with all of you. But in terms of actually celebrating a birthday, we don't really celebrate. Now, like, eventually we'll have some cake and some pizza at home. That's kind of our family tradition, but who knows when that'll actually happen. But as far as, like, birthday celebrations go, I've never been that big into that. Mark Woodmansee, yeah, Mark, I appreciate those comments. Thank you. And you're right. Let's see what else. What else is going on? Gary Roach, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. Foster Moss, I appreciate that. Some talk about the offensive line. Yeah, I mean, it's just got to be better. Just got to be better. And if it is, boy, everything can be different with UGA. Everything can be different. Let me take one more spin around the comments. Maybe get ready to bounce out of here. Chastain Coleman says, just imagine if the Eagles drafted Jalen Walker. If the rest of the NFL lets the Eagles get Jalen Walker, then they really do deserve whatever's coming to them at that point. They may really deserve whatever's coming to them. So Bill Sanders gives us the history. Today is Georgia Day. It's the day General James Oglethorpe landed on Yamacraw Bluff in Savannah and founded the colony of Georgia. So there you go. The sort of ultimate Georgian having a birthday on Georgia Day. Now, when I say ultimate Georgian, I don't mean I'm the best Georgian ever. I mean, nobody loves being from Georgia more than I do. So for someone who really considers himself a true Georgian in every sense of the word, to have my birthday be Georgia Day, I'm pretty proud of that. Pretty proud of that. Let's see what else. Yeah, Terry Rigdon, Kirk Schultz, thank you for the birthday stuff. Justin Ham, appreciate that. Brian Whitaker, thank you very much. A lot of really nice people. Jamie Huff, appreciate that. Great stuff. Great stuff. All right. Anything else before we go? Let's see if we can get ready to wrap it up here today. Jim Kay says Howie Roseman, that's the Eagles GM, is a genius. Hope he keeps drafting our players. It's the thing that you're reminded of in sports, which is, and you kind of wonder if eventually all college football teams will have to have this version too. That if you could have anything, you want the great GM, right? I mean, this is true for like a Howie Roseman and the Eagles. I mean, obviously, Anthopoulos, what he's done for the Braves. Even with the constraints, still finding a way to put a good roster together. The NBA's got its versions of that too. I think that if you have the good personnel man, the man making the right decisions about, here's what we're going to value, here's what we're going to not in terms of the sort of players we bring in, boy, you'd almost take that more than anything. I mean, I really do think that if you told me I could have the best player in the NFL or the best GM in the NFL, I believe I want the best GM. And I'd take that over the coach too. I believe I want the best GM. I know that's true in baseball. If I could have the best player, if I could have Shohei Ohtani or what Theo Epstein once was, Alex Anthopoulos might be now, or, I don't know, whoever it's been in given eras, I believe I'd rather have the better GM than the better player. I really do think so. Personnel decisions are not easy. Not easy. And some guys are just better at them than others. Knowing when to, just knowing how to make every dollar stretch as far as it can go. I think that's right. All right. We're going to get ready to go. Good stuff. Thank you all. Appreciate that. By the way, Chef Jay Bowen checks in to say he's relocating from Rabun County to Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Not looking forward to seeing that ugly orange all the time. Well, it's funny. We always stay usually in Oak Ridge when we go to Knoxville. So I've spent my share of time in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, ironically enough, Jay. So you are right there. You're going to be right there with them. And Rabun County is a beautiful place. So we wish you the best of luck with all that. We'll try to keep you entertained as far as the Georgia talk goes. Rabun County and Lake Burton, that whole area is about as pretty as it gets. So, but you know what? Oak Ridge is going to have plenty going for it there too, I'm sure. Like I said, we have spent many a time right there in Oak Ridge and got some stories to tell about it. So we'll save those for a different day. All right, y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Got a text from Daria this week celebrating those Philly Dawgs, so he's loving all of that, and it's always fun to do business with somebody that loves Georgia fans and Georgia stuff and the stuff we do here around Dawg Nation. So if it's time to get your AC tuned up, it's also kind of cold again, so you're thinking about that heating system, heating, air conditioning, any of those issues that you're dealing with. If the system's not working the way that it should, RS Andrews can put a smile on your face by kind of getting it back to the sort of factory fresh specs you need it to be. You need that system to keep working and last you a little longer. Everybody's always trying to get you to replace it. RS Andrews can tell you how to get some new life out of that old unit. So find them online at rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. Back tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you then.